Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I am your host, and I'm also the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine. Today's show highlights an eclectic leader in our profession. He's an entrepreneur, a filmmaker, a residency director, a prolific author and researcher, a previous congressional candidate, and also the president of the American Board of Podiatric Medicine. Welcome to Dean's Chat, Dr. Rogers.
Hey, I am glad to be here.
Well, thank you. So Lee, what we're going to do, just in keeping with the Dean's Chat theme, we're going to be a little more informal. And for the rest of the discussion, let's just go by Lee and Jeff. How's that sound?
That sounds fine to me. Perfect.
So just to get started, would you give us a short history of your academics, where you went to school, where you did your residency, and maybe a couple things on the personal note?
Sure. Yeah, I went to school I'm originally from Chicago. My family moved to Missouri when I was really young. My dad was mayor of our small town, and we owned the motel, the restaurant, and the bar in the town, which is really pretty much, that's the whole, if you're the mayor and you own those things, then that's pretty much the whole town. So
life is good.
Yeah, right. But the town was 2,500 people. And I get on cruise ships sometimes that have more people. I was on the A380 flying somewhere, and there were 800 people on the plane. And I was thinking, yeah, this is a third of my town could sit in this plane. But then I went to college in Missouri at Truman State. I went to podiatric medical school at Des Moines University, did my residency in New York City at the St. Vincent's Catholic Medical Centers, which is no longer around. And did a one-year fellowship with David Armstrong when he was at Scholl at Clear. And then, since then I've been in practice. I'm sure we'll get to different places I practice and what I've learned at these places, but been around the country.
That's great. Speaking about being around the country, you've recently been around the world. You just got back from overseas on an American Board of Podiatric Medicine International project. Can you talk to us about that for just a couple minutes?
Sure. Yeah. So we were just in Malta, had what we're calling the Malta Accord, which was so Malta's a tiny island in between Sicily and Africa. Strategic in so many reasons, usually for war in the Mediterranean, and been conquered by everybody. That's why it's got so much culture and just an amalgamation of different cultures there. But we brought together podiatrists from several countries. So the Canada, the UK, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Malta, South Africa, and Australia and New Zealand. I think that's it. And they're looking for a way to standardize have a standardized test that will acknowledge that they've all met a certain standard around the globe, so that they can have better career mobility between these countries. And so in the EU, if you're a nurse or a physician, you can move between countries pretty easily, but not if you're a podiatrist. And it actually goes against some of the laws that have been established in the European Union, but they do it they've made exceptions for certain things. And podiatry is one of the things they made an exception for, because there's no standardization of their education and training. And so this action by ABPM International, which is actually a separate entity from ABPM, me being president of ABPM, I also sit on the board of ABPM International as a separate position, but they're two separate legal entities. And ABPM lends International it's part of its name, and also some material support, to help create the tests and all that. But you could imagine, if you're a bachelor's degree trained podiatrist around the world, that's actually common for even our medical colleagues. This is what a lot of Americans don't understand, is that if you're a physician in England, you get an MBBS, medicine bachelor's of surgery. So they don't have a doctorate degree. They get and an MD is actually more of a research degree in the United Kingdom. So So they've achieved parity with their medical colleagues as far as their educational degree is concerned. And so, we need to acknowledge that and help our international brethren podiatrists along. And so they, at that level, you can imagine that they're the same type of questions would not be as appropriate from the ABPM domestic exam, like things that related to surgery or that, because it's not as common to perform surgery as a podiatrist in the rest of the world, although it's becoming more common. So that's the goal, is to really standardize the recognition of their education and training to create more respect and mobility for podiatrists internationally.
Wow. That's making a major impact globally. Let's talk about another area where you've made an impact globally, and that's in the area of the diabetic foot. Lee, you're well known both for research and for writing papers on diabetic foot. How did you initially get your passion for the diabetic foot, and who are some of your mentors that have guided you along the way?
Mentorship is probably the most important aspect, I think, of any type of career development. And I realized that early on, and I found some really good mentors. And one of my first mentors in the diabetic foot, I had many mentors for other things, but my first mentor in the diabetic foot was Robert Freiberg. And Bob's actually just landed in San Antonio today to come to a meeting for tomorrow, so I get to meet up with him again here. But he was a clinical dean at Des Moines University when I was there as a student, and he following him around as a student and seeing just like how sick these patients were. They were really sick patients. And he was the only one on the faculty that was he went to every hospital in Des Moines, and he was in such demand. And they would call the clinic, and he'd run over to the hospital to go see somebody. His clinic was the busiest clinic of any of the professors there. And it's because there was such a demand and a need for this. So he told me early on, he said, Lee, if you specialize in the diabetic foot, everything you write will be published and you'll be invited to lecture around the world, and he said, there's not many of us out there. And so beyond that, I mean, he helped connect me with some people around the world that made an impact. So I was the first student from Des Moines to do an international rotation in my fourth year. I did, where a lot of people are figuring out where they're going to go to residency, and they're spending all their time at these programs, and that's important. I realized that this was the only time in my life that I really have this time to just take off and go somewhere and learn from somebody. And so I went to Manchester, to the University of Manchester, and did a month with Andrew Bolton and Riaz Malik, who, are really, Andrew's the godfather in the diabetic foot. And Andrew had trained David Armstrong, partly, Harkless and Andrew, were both mentors of Armstrong's. And I got to know Armstrong through that. And then eventually he became my mentor during my fellowship program. And then when you realize how impactful that is, and, I'm finished my fellowship, in 2007, I still have calls with David every couple of days, and or text messages at least every day, but calls every couple of days. And he still mentors me. You get mentored until, and that's great, right? You're getting mentored for your whole career, because it takes a lot to understand how that's important.
It's the nature of relationships and respect for mentors, and then mentors have respect for their mentees and want to give back more. So it's a great circle. So in becoming an expert in the diabetic foot, you were very instrumental in developing some consensus documents. Talk about having another impact globally. Let's talk about that for a minute, because you did a consensus statement as one of the lead authors on Charcot, and you also did one on offloading the diabetic foot. Talk to me about the impact of these consensus documents and how they've made it kind of an impact in your life going forward professionally.
So we did Charcot in I think we met in 2010, and then it was published in 2011. I think the offloading consensus was 2009 and published in 2010. We're redoing the Charcot consensus now. Actually, I have to go to Paris this year to work on redoing that one. We're breaking it up into two. We realized really that there were two groups of people that were treating Charcot. There's endocrinologists who are treating everything non-surgically, and then surgeons who just look at it so much differently. So we're breaking it up into those two categories. And then I also I was co-author of the Global Vascular Guidelines, which is another consensus document that's out there. And I just finished the consensus with Larry Lavery for the Wound Healing Society on diabetic foot ulcers. So these types of interactions that you have with fellow experts from around the world, and they're not just your friends, because most of the time I'm meeting new people that come into these types of roles. And this interaction, it really helps you to grow as a person as well, and as an expert, and helps you to have a cautious approach for a number of reasons in what your recommendations are. In your own practice, it's you, and you know what you have available to you. And I can treat people to the best of my abilities, and that we feel like we do a great job here at UT. But you have to create, when you do a consensus, you have to create this clinical practice guideline out of the consensus. That's the way it's going to be most helpful. I mean, a consensus of the evidence really doesn't help as many people as creating a clinical practice guideline does, right? So, but you have to think about, can this be applied somewhere in the third world as well as it can be applied in a tertiary care hospital? And if it can't, then maybe you create two different paths in that clinical practice guideline. So it's a lot of consideration of other patients, practice patterns, education and training in various countries, especially if you're going to have a global impact on that. So a lot goes into those, and you really grow after having been involved in those. Also, a lot of debate and arguing, a lot of opinions and passions on both sides of certain issues. So you become, I think, a better academician after that point as well.
I agree. I remember in 2014, when we were working on one of the offloading documents, Dr. Freiberg was involved, and we had some passionate discussion. There's no doubt.
And that was it. It was 2014.
Right.
Yeah.
So where the rubber hits the road is where you're seeing patients, right? And talk to us a little bit about your formation of the Amputation Prevention Center, because really that set the stage for a lot of your clinical work going forward.
Yeah. So I was at, I just finished my fellowship, and I was recruited by Vince Mandrakia, who was a podiatrist that became the chief medical officer of Broadlawns Medical Center in Des Moines, Iowa. So I knew him. He was another mentor of mine, and I knew him when I was a student there. And his mentorship really was around giving back educationally. I mean, he was a great speaker. Gave lectures to the students every Tuesday and Friday at 6 a.m. There were lectures to the students for pretty much the whole time he was at Broadlawns, and that's amazing. Just did that for his care for the students, and then also about publishing and understanding the literature. He was big into that, and that was great mentorship for me as well. So Vincent recruited me to come to Des Moines, Iowa, and he didn't even really, he said, just come here and build something. And he said, I'll help you. We're going to build something here. And he said, I really want you here. So Nick Bevilacqua and I went there, and we built what we named, and for the first time, was the Amputation Prevention Center at Broadlawns Medical Center. And we did this for a few reasons. I mean, we thought about all the other terms that are used for the same thing, limb salvage, right? And limb salvage is hard for a patient to even spell the word limb. and limb preservation, these other things that are out there. But in reality, nobody ever searches for that. Like, you don't have a patient that searches, I need to go to a limb salvage center or a limb preservation center. So these are really highfalutin academic words that we use for ourselves. But in reality, what patients are looking for, and we found is through surveys and things like that, the most common thing that they search for is alternatives to an amputation. They've been, and they use this phrase too, like, I've been offered an amputation. Been offered an amputation, I'm looking for alternatives. And so we thought about also, in Spanish at least, but in the Romance languages, the words amputation and prevention don't really have to have much work to be translated, and you can understand both of those words by reading them. If they were in a Romance language and you speak English, you would understand what those two words meant. And so with limb preservation and all that, in Spanish, I asked somebody one time to explain what limb preservation was, and they gave me a really long phrase, and I said, well, that's obviously reason why we didn't use that. So we created that center first. Then after a few years, I was recruited by George Andros, a vascular surgeon in Los Angeles, who'd done some work with David Armstrong before, to come there and recreate kind of the same thing, but bigger, right? So we did that at Valley Presbyterian Hospital, and that grew in Los Angeles. And then eventually, I was contacted by two business people who were one was a nurse and the other was like a CFO of a insurance company before, and they had a management company that managed wound centers, and they said, you know what, when we manage wound centers, a lot of it is diabetic foot that's in the wound center, but when you just send a diabetic foot ulcer to a regular wound center, you don't really get the urgency around all of this. And they said, we need to revamp some of these things, and would you want to be a part of our company? And so I said, we might get into some business talk later just about how to be successful, but I made a comment. I said, sure. I said, they said, would you could be our medical director? And I said, sure. How much are you going to pay me? And they said, oh, we can't pay anything. We'll just give you some equity in the company. And I thought, well, I guess I don't have anything to lose, right? So then I think the amount is undisclosed, but the company was sold for several tens of millions of dollars. That was 2009-ish or so, or maybe 10. And in 2016, it was sold. They'd already been working on it for several years before I got there, but we created the Amputation Prevention Centers of America. So we just took the same word and we just put of America at the end of it. And so we could kind of franchise it around. And so many hospitals really wanted an amputation prevention center because versus a wound centers are typically outpatient only, right? As you know.
Yep.
But limb salvage is really a lot of inpatient work, and you're constantly admitting patients to the hospital, and you're doing lots of surgeries. And if you think about the hospital's business perspective, they want to have people come in that need more resources that they can do more things to, because that helps the hospital out. So they really bit on that versus wound centers. Wound center's great. You got a wound center. Wound centers are profitable. I mean, I think it's more profitable when you add hyperbarics, regardless of any of the evidence for certain things in hyperbarics, but it's more profitable when you add hyperbarics. So then hospitals are generally like, okay, fine, we'll open a wound center. They all recognize the need. The need is there, right? But then if you're in your private office, and I think you did a lot of wounds in your private office when you were in Colorado, it's hard to make that work in your private office because the patients are time consuming. They require a lot of resources. The products that you might use. I mean, I'm not talking about products that are reimbursed. I'm talking about unreimbursed stuff like just dressings and all of that. That's really hard to do in your office. But if you do it as an attachment to a hospital, like through hospital outpatient department, they get a facility fee for covering all of that. And you're able to absorb some of the cost into there. So hospitals really looked at that as a way to they call it physician alignment, but align with physicians to make you more part of the family at the hospital, and you're admitting more people, you're doing more tests there. So that's been my experience with that. But it turned into something that I'm no longer part of that company any longer. I'm now a university employee, work for the state. I don't have any equity anymore in the company after it's sold, but it makes you proud to see something like that carry on, and it's the reason why we used. I'm sure we'll talk about ABPM in a little bit too, but the reason why we use the same language for ABPM Certificate of Added Qualification in amputation prevention was to help create that sense of translation.
Fantastic. Congratulations on that. That really made a difference, not only in a lot of patients' lives, but enabled doctors to provide care that perhaps they wouldn't have been able to also. We'll talk about ABPM in a little bit, but I wanted to shift gears and talk about a couple things. When COVID hit, you were living in California and you were living on a boat, right? I thought it'd be interesting to share the story of the name of the boat.
Yeah. Can you put a picture up on the thing if I send you a picture?
I don't know that I can at this moment, but I can perhaps add it in when we edit.
That's what I mean. Yeah, when you edit. So when you're editing, and I know people are hearing the behind the scenes already, but that's because I was involved in the movies too. I know how that works. But I'm going to send you a picture of my boat, just the back of it, because that's what's funny about this thing. So so I named the boat. I got a boat in after I sold the company because I thought, what else should I do? I'll get a boat, and I was recently divorced, and so I'm living in Southern California, and I didn't really. I'm fairly much of a minimalist. I don't like a lot of stuff. So living on a boat for me is not a big deal. I would lived out of like one suitcase for years. I didn't even, there was a time in my life not too long ago that I didn't even have a car. Before I moved to San Antonio, I didn't have a car for 5 years, and I didn't need a car. So so I had a boat, so that's, I was already spending way too much in gas, but so I got this boat. It was a 42-foot Sea Ray sedan bridge. And it had 2 staterooms and one head, and I learned all the lingo, by the way. So I'm appropriate in my maritime lingo. And then I learned how to pilot it on my own with I was trained how to do it. And then the reason why you get trained is because it makes your insurance cheaper. So they force you to get your certificate. So I would go back and forth to Catalina Island all the time from LA. And if you're familiar with that song, 26 miles across the sea. So Catalina Island is waiting for me. So it's 26 miles to Catalina. And just a real fun time in my life where I didn't do as much clinical work. I still did a lot of writing and research and did a lot of consulting, but I really slowed down and just was able to enjoy a few years of just, living on a boat and still traveling a lot, but living on a boat and enjoying Southern California. I did sell it when I moved here. But when I bought the boat, its name was Sundaze, Sundaze, because everybody's got this funny names for their boats, right? So so I wanted to rename it because I just that name didn't speak to me, and so everybody told me, oh, it's bad luck to rename a boat. You can't rename the boat once it's got its name. It's your boat will be cursed if you rename it. And so I didn't care. I just didn't want that name. And it's as easy as just filing something with the Coast Guard. I don't even think it costs any money. You file something with the Coast Guard, and then you pay somebody to come out and scrape the old sticker off and like put a new sticker on the back of your boat. So I renamed it Sharko, Sharko, which is the way that patients always spell it whenever you tell them that for the first time. And it had 2 meanings for me. One is that I was involved in a bunch of shark movies as a producer, and then 2 for Sharko Foot. So I thought, how appropriate for that. I did do to appease some of the neighboring boat owners who were worried that my boat was cursed and it was next to their boat. They're very superstitious people. I did do a renaming ceremony with the champagne bottle and all that to at least ward off the ghost pirates or whatever demons, would come to get you. Yeah, whatever would come and get you. Yes.
I think that's a great story. Well, what a great segue into your movie career. Tell us about a little bit about filming and you were a director. Was this part of that few year hiatus from practice?
No, it started a little bit before then, but then continued on during that, and really ended with COVID, because independent filmmakers had a real tough time during COVID. Insurance costs went way up. If one person got COVID that's on the set, even now, shuts down a set for like 2 weeks, and so it's really, really difficult as an independent filmmaker to absorb the risk of you're filming in such a short period of time, and if you have to stop filming for 2 weeks, it will blow a hole so wide in your budget that you can't recover from that. So that's the reason why the insurance costs went up so high.
Right.
And so a lot of it. So there were really no independent films that were being made. There were creative people that were doing total animations and things like that during COVID, right? So some of these movies that were coming out during COVID were either things that they had filmed in the past but not yet used, and they just had a bunch of material that they were just in post-production, or people thought, hey, we just sit at a computer and just make an animation. So that animations became, and also I'm sitting at home all day long, so animations became more popular during the pandemic. But so I started with one of my patients, and I can talk about this because he talked about it publicly. It was Stephen First, who was Flounder in Animal House, and Stephen, he said to me, he had bilateral Charcot foot, and I saved both of his legs from amputation, and with wounds and other things, and you know what it's like when you have a patient like that. They're a patient of yours for life when you see somebody, and so. The first time I met him, he didn't like me because I have the come to Jesus meeting with everybody when I meet him for the first time, and I said, look, your life is different now. This is why it's different, and how you're going to have to adapt your life to living with a Charcot foot, and so a lot of people don't like hearing that, and so he left angry and didn't see me for a year. And then came back when he got his other Charcot foot and said, "You're right. Let's talk about how I can keep doing what I need to do, but adapt." So we worked on that, and then he said, "Hey, do you want to get involved in one of my movies?" And I said, I was like, "Well, get involved how? I mean, like be an extra or hang around and look for foot problems? I don't know." And he said, "Oh no." He says, "You just give me a bunch of money, and then you're a producer." And I thought, oh, that sounds like a great idea. My accountant told me, my accountant's an LA accountant. He's like, that's the worst idea ever. He said, I know so many people lose their shirt in the movies. So what happened was he convinced me to do it anyway, because it was a thriller movie called Cold Moon. And we had Christopher Lloyd in it, and Candy Clark from American Graffiti, and some other people in there, Frank Whaley from Pulp Fiction. So we had some good actors that were in it, and it was not really a horror movie; it was a thriller. They called it a psychological thriller, but we had a Halloween release date for it. And he said, "Oh, look, any of these movies that come out around Halloween, they do like $5 million in the theater." And so our budget for the movie was like $1.4 million. And he's like, so, and there's 7 different ways to make a movie. I still remember this conversation I had with him. He's like, and he tells me the 7 ways to make money with a movie. And he goes through the whole list of everything, all the way through like airlines to streaming. He's going through all the different things that you have to go in order. And the first one is the theater. So he says, even if you miss the theater, you still have these other ways, and international sales, whatever. So you go through the whole thing. So it was like a sales pitch, but it was hilarious, So because he's a funny guy, and so it was just seeing Flounder like pitch you how to put money into a movie. So so I did that, and actually the movie did really well. I mean, not like a blockbuster or anything, but it did well for what our budget was. And so then we had to invest in some other movies with the money. And so we then moved on to shark movies, because Sci-Fi, which is owned by NBC Universal, they knew Stephen because Stephen had made like Lake Placid 2 and 3, and his son Griff First, who's a good friend of mine now. Griff was also a producer and an actor, and so they said to him, look, we've got Sharknado, they own Sharknado. They said, we've got Sharknado, but we want to do Sharknado Week. Just like they do Shark Week, we want Sharknado Week on Sci-Fi, but we don't have enough really ridiculous shark movies. So they said, can you guys help us? And we'll just pay you to make some ridiculous shark movies. And so we made 4 really ridiculous shark movies. Ghost Shark, Ghost Shark, Atomic Shark, Nightmare Shark, and Trailer Park Shark. Actually, Nightmare Shark was the last one that we made, and that was right before COVID. And so they all play on Sci-Fi. They still play now, and you can find them wherever. But they are you got to be really into ridiculous shark movies. And the question on our minds every time we go, and I make a cameo in most of them.
I was going to ask. I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. How can we make this more ridiculous? Like you sit there and you're like, no, wait a minute. That wasn't ridiculous enough. How can it be more ridiculous? You put in, pop culture references, everything. It was so much fun. I actually had so much fun doing that. I think more fun than if you made a movie that was rather serious. You just were there having fun, and you're doing it in places like Puerto Rico or wherever. That's where you film these movies. So, cause you need the sea and the coast, and you have to have a film tax credit and all of this. So yeah, so much fun.
What an experience. I think that's fabulous. All right. So let's shift back to your current role. I remember last summer, we were coming out of COVID, and we were talking, and you'd accepted the role heading up the podiatry program, or podiatry chief at the University of Texas, San Antonio. And I remember you telling about the roles of patients that hadn't been seen, and you literally jumped into the deep end of the pool, so to speak.
Well, Jeff, it's actually 2 summers ago now.
Oh my gosh!
So we've already, yeah, it's already been that long. And it went by in a blink of an eye, because it's the busiest I've ever been in my life, being here.
Let's hear about it.
But I enjoy it. So it's, and as long as I enjoy it, I'll continue to do it. But I work more than 100 hours a week. People think about it, you get a professor's salary, which what those are like, right? You get a professor's salary, but you're working in a busy place like this. And, so I started in October of 2021, and I was brought here. My offer letter for, as soon as this job came open, I got calls from people like Harkless and Lavery and Armstrong, and said, you gotta apply for this job, because this is the place where everything started in the diabetic foot. And it really, I think, kind of lost its way for a decade or so. Not a lot of publications coming out, not a lot of groundbreaking work here. And I applied for the job. I interviewed here, and when I got the offer letter said, you are to restore the national prominence this program once held. You're to reestablish a robust research enterprise, and you are to oversee a training program of excellence. Those are 3 things in my offer letter, and I remember them, and I had them on my whiteboard for a while, but I remember them. I can just recite them, and I think every day, how am I living up to these 3 things that, for the reason I was brought here to this program, and so it started out with just really, we had 1,200 patients on the waiting list, only at one of our places at Texas Diabetes Institute, which is a place where Armstrong and Lavery and Harkless did all their original research. A lot of these papers that came out in the 90s and going into even the early 2000s were all based on research that was done there. And so the historic nature of this place, that it's now if it doesn't reverse the image, I don't know, but it's now 50 years old. For the program.
That's great.
The historic nature of this place is something that needs to be respected and celebrated. And so being the leader at a place like this, really, you have to have that healthy respect for your history, but then direct where it's going to go in the future. And so I think you've seen that we've tied a lot of our history in together. Dr. Harkless is now retired from his deanship at 2 two of the podiatry schools in the country, and now he lives back in San Antonio again. He never gave up his house. He lives back in San Antonio, and he's going to be professor emeritus here, and still come in and provide mentorship to residents and students here, right down the street from his house. And so it's just a lot to put it all together. But the waiting list for patients, the number of patients that are in South Texas that have diabetic foot problems, the opportunity to perform research here and to make a difference is just tremendous. And so my job is to harness all of that and to create this opportunity. So I have two quotes that I like, so there's one that's on the back of my wall right up here. You can see it. You can't read it, I'm sure, but it says, life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. And it says unknown, but it's actually George Bernard Shaw that said that. And so that's true. You have to, it's not about, even I tell young people too, when they're out, they're saying, I can't find a job. I'm looking to find a job. I said, why are you trying to? I said, yeah, you can look and try to find a job, but why don't you create a job for yourself? That's the perfect job. And this is the first job I've ever had that I didn't create for myself. I submitted an application. I'm here. All the other jobs I had, I convinced somebody else that they needed me, and this is what it's going to take to get me, and this is why it's going to be good. And that's the kind of mentorship I provide young people too, is how to do that. So the other quote is here on my computer. It's on like the place where my hands rest in my laptop, and it says, "Don't wait for an opportunity, create it."
I love it.
And so it's. I like quotes like that because it's about you making an impact in your environment. What movie is it that Jack Nicholson was in, where he said he doesn't want to be. Let me think about it. But he says I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Right.
And that's the movie where they're up in Boston, and it's Matt Damon that's in the movie. I forget what is it called, but that's the point.
Sure.
You for all the complaining that there is, you could sit here and complain. There's stuff I don't like about being a podiatrist. There's stuff I don't like about where I work, and it looks like I'm totally satisfied and I'm everything's rosy, and I am satisfied, but I look at the opportunities that I have to change the things I don't like, and I work to change them.
Love it. I commend you on your efforts in San Antonio. I mean, there's a tremendous legacy, as you said, and the future is very bright, especially with the build out of the hospital and the podiatry floor and the limb preservation unit. I commend you on all that. We could talk for hours, but we're running out of time today. And Lee, we appreciate your time, your expertise, your knowledge. And on behalf of everybody, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, thanks to everybody there that's helping to run things behind the scenes. I know what a big responsibility it is.
Thanks, Lee. And I also want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today on Dean's Chat. We certainly strive to discuss all things podiatric medicine. We'll see you next week, and don't forget to give us a 5-star rating. Until then, cheers.